Hello, everybody, and welcome to the online launch of Innovation at the Back of the Bus, a defense of innovation in the civil society sector. I'm Catherine Springall, the Communications Director of Say Yes, an Alberta-based charity that works to end domestic abuse and sexual exploitation. I'll be your host today. People are just entering the room really quickly, so I'll just give us a second to trickle in as your names pop up. Most of you maybe have used Zoom webinars, but you can always plop your questions in the bottom of your screen in the Q&A function as we move along. So today I'm joined by Andrea Silverstone and Carrie McManus. They are the authors of the book, and as well as Adam Waldman. You might be new to you, but he authored chapter 2 of the book on the insights and analysis function. Hi, everyone. Before we kick things off, I would like to start with a personal land acknowledgement. For more than the past year, staff have worked to create personal land acknowledgements to center Indigenous peoples and our own history and obligations in our journey towards truth, reconciliation, and relationship with Indigenous peoples. The creation of these acknowledgements begins with self-reflection and continues with learning and action. I'm still on this journey and learning a lot and making mistakes along the way, but I'd like to share with you where I'm at today in this acknowledgement. My connection to the land is shaped by stories. It's why I got into the profession I have with communications. My family are settlers in the city of Mohkinstsis or Calgary, and I love walking the city and nearby mountains and learning about how people and animals have lived and understood the world around them. I find the stories on signs at trailheads and along pathways, in books, and when I'm very fortunate, told by the people who have lived them or who have had those stories passed down to them. I honor and acknowledge the Treaty 7 nations who have lived on this land for many generations and whose oral practices have preserved these stories, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Kina, and Piikani, the Stoney Nakoda nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. I also acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. I acknowledge the commitments made to these nations in the treaties that were negotiated in bad faith and then broken for the benefit of settlers like me and my family. I acknowledge and support the 13th call to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which recognizes Aboriginal cultures and languages, including the stories that inspire me, as a fundamental element of Canadian culture and society, and calls for the government to provide sufficient funds to support Aboriginal peoples and communities in their work to preserve their cultures and languages as the best people to do so. Now, to get started with our program, I'd like to tell you a bit more about our authors who are on screen. So there's economist Adam Waldman. He's not only the smartest person on this panel, sorry, Carrie and Andrea, but probably in many places he shows up. When he's not generously writing chapters for other people's books, he heads up global retirement data insights at Manulife. Andrea Silverstone is the longtime CEO of Say Yes, a registered social worker with a Master of Science in the Psychology of Course of Control. By the end of this year, maybe, we'll likely be calling her Dr. Silverstone as she earns her doctorate in the study of course of control. Carrie McManus is so committed to innovation, we put it in her title. She's a director of innovation and programs for Say Yes, a registered social worker, and aspiring race car driver when she gets done with the job of ending abuse in our province. So welcome to the panelists. Today is going to be a rather informal Q&A. I'll kick it off with some questions, but leave time at the end for any questions you may have in the audience. So please submit your questions, as I mentioned, at the bottom of your screen using the Q&A function. So to kick it off, our first question comes from just picking up the book. What's with the title?
So Carrie and I had an image in our mind when we started conceiving of how innovation happens, and especially writing about innovation, is that there are these kids that often sit at the back of the bus. And I think people often just see those kids that are at the back of the bus as people that are like, antisocial, breaking the mores of society and causing problems. And actually what they are usually kids that are out of the box. They're not exactly, within the way that everybody expects them to be. And also on their journey to the back of the bus, they see a lot of things because they see everybody else who's sitting in all of the seats. And actually, what they're doing is thin slicing and learning from all of those people as they head towards the back of the bus. And then it allows them to be out of the box and free from some of those, I'm going to say, societal norms that keep us stuck in places that don't allow us to innovate.
I also I grew up with a father who was very innovative, and he once bought a bus seat for a bus and put it into a van that we drove around, and that seat was unbelievably bouncy, and you would often sit in the very back and you would hit your head on the roof because it was not designed to be in a vehicle that size. And so when I think of the back of the bus, I also think of a place that can be uncomfortable, and it can be really bumpy, and it can feel like you're really disconnected from some of the swerves that are coming. And so the ability to figure out how to be there and how to manage that seems really interesting to me when you think about innovation, because I think that innovation is bumpy and it's not a smooth ride. And if you're looking for a smooth ride, you're not really interested in the innovation sort of perspective.
Okay. So that's how we got to the naming of the book, but the purpose of the book. Innovation is a popular buzzword in business and increasingly popular in our sector. When it's such a phenomenon to talk about, at least, why did you feel the need to write a book defending it?
So I think that there's a difference between talking about innovation and picking up innovation as sort of the current buzz thing that is happening, and truly being willing to sit in the vulnerability and the curiosity and the interest that comes from actually doing innovation or being innovative, not doing innovation, actually being innovative. I think that when we think about innovation, I often, as a social worker, I think to early in my career when trauma-informed practice was the thing, and everybody was doing trauma-informed practice and everybody talked about it. And I remember reading about it once and thinking, isn't this just good social work practice? Like, aren't we doing this already? Shouldn't we be doing this as a standard? And are there things we can learn? Yes, but why are we talking about this as if it's new or as if it's this buzz? And so when I think about innovation and the innovation that gets talked about now, I think it is putting a label onto something to allow us to feel like we're doing something different or we're doing something more interesting. Whereas I think when we talk about it in the book, we talk less about, I think, the actions of innovation. We talk a lot about innovation as a mindset, what that shifts and changes in every action you have. And we talk, unbelievably, we talk a lot about the emotional experience of innovation and the work that goes into what that means, because it's one thing to say, I'm going to be really innovative, and then have one thing go wrong and go, well, that obviously was the wrong thing, versus saying, I'm going to be really innovative, have one thing go wrong and go, awesome, what did we learn? What do we do next? And before you take that next step forward.
I also think that as much as there's a buzzword of innovation that's, I think, happening in our sector, there still, for the most part, are not funders that are funding innovation. There are not, I'm going to say, boards that have a lot of tolerance for the failure that might come with innovation. And so I think that, when we say, a defense of innovation in the civil sector, it's sort of, a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, we're going to explain to you why it's actually valuable for funders to invest in this, boards to have tolerance for it, our sector to make space for it.
Okay. So you've mentioned a board that supports it to be important to say Jess's approach to innovation, any comfort with failure as being important. Are there any other factors about your approach to innovation or your comfort to innovation that has helped you on this innovation journey that you're on?
So, Carrie mentioned this in terms of what this book is about. It's not a how-to, it's a framework, and a big part of the framework is how you emotionally are able to approach this work. And so I actually think that the foundation, well, it's the foundation of everything, but for sure it's the foundation of innovation, is your emotional capacity to sit in discomfort, to sit in uncertainty, to sit in the unknown. And that's really, really hard. And it's really, really hard, especially in a professional place, because we've been taught that we're supposed to have the answers. Whereas I think that what innovation is trying to encourage us to do is sit in the questions.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think I think we talk about that quite a bit, and we use quite a number of examples, I think, from our own sector, but really talk about how that, we know that our sector is the microcosm of the larger civil society sector, and people who are doing this type of work, and how, you can't just pick up a business book about innovation and copy all of those sorts of things because of the type of work that we do. And so there's both opportunity for different things that you can do within this in civil society, but there's often also, I think, greater kind of off ramps or levers that we look at and go, oh, but because of the work that we do, because we work with people, because we have this, this vulnerable populations and all of that, it often, I think, stops us from being as innovative as we would like to be, because we become really concerned about the risk perspective of what we're doing. And so I think that, when we're thinking about innovation in civil society, it has to be different than business, but also we have to be able to look at our risk tolerance and where that sits and figure out if there's opportunity for that to shift or change, and how much of that we're carrying is actually us carrying that and not the clients that we serve or the communities that we work in.
Okay. Just to follow up on that, of course, there's the fear of hurting people, but how else do you get that people like government or funders or colleagues even that want to do the best they can and not hurt people along the way? How do you explain or get them comfortable with risk?
So I think that the answer is actually not an answer of having them delve into innovation. I think it's an answer of a personal journey to create the emotional chops to be able to engage in the risk. And so for me, we have a chapter in the book called, I think, The Feels. And I actually think that is in some ways the very most important chapter. And I think that the Feels is also an important chapter, not just for our colleagues in the sector and for funders, but also for boards of directors. And I think that actually that's the starting point. And I think that all of the other things that are in the book, we're only going to be able to do them, and we're only going to be able to engage in them if we're constantly being introspective and self-reflective on the emotions that are driving us either towards or away from innovation.
So changes my question on a bit, but this also ties in. You in the book talk a lot about values. I don't know if it's the social worker in you, but one that was rather interesting. There's the ones that you are naturally tied to innovation, like being courageous or maybe vulnerable. But there's another one, trust in the messiness. What the heck does that mean when it comes to innovation?
Trust in the messiness is my favorite value, maybe of all time. And part of why I laugh every time I hear it is because when we were changing our name to Say Jess and we were working with an amazing branding expert, she said to me, "That's not a value." And I said, "Sure it is." And she said, "It's a series of words together." And I was like, you know what? It's fine. We can do this. It'll be okay. Trust in this. Trust in the messiness for me is the core. This is not about trust. This is not about blind trust. This is not about just stepping into trust. You have to trust, but what you're trusting in is that it's going to not look the way that you think that it's going to. You have to trust that you have a great idea, and then you're going to try that great idea, and it is going to go sideways. And that in that messiness, in that going of sideways, in those things that we can sometimes look at and think, that looks like or feels like failure, that looks like or feels like a mistake, there is opportunity for learning. The greatest things that I have ever learned are the things that I thought was going to be something totally different than what it was, including the process of writing this book and connecting with Adam. We didn't connect with Adam. We didn't start this process being like, we're going to write a book. We're going to get an economist and he's going to write a chapter in it. We were like, we're going to get an economist. I said, we're going to get an economist to make an economic argument as to why people in Alberta should care about domestic abuse. That was the starting sort of script. If I hadn't trusted in the messiness of what would come from that, we might have written one paper about that 5 years ago and nobody would think about it anymore. And so that's part of, for me, the idea of trusting in the messiness. And I think the values of, we talk a lot in the book about our values, and those don't have to be the values of innovation. But I think, as Andrea said, you have to do your own personal work. And when you've done your own personal work, then you can look at what are my values and how do I bring those into innovation. I value messiness. I think it's fun and interesting, which means everything I do within an innovation space brings that value in because I appreciate that and because I work with my team to be able to see the value of it, and that sort of thing. But it's not the one and only value around innovation. It's actually not about my list. It's about you figuring out what your list is and then holding space for it and figuring out what that looks like in an innovative place.
I think, and also understanding how your values either encourage innovation or discourage innovation, because values can also act as barriers to innovation if they bind you into things that don't allow you to be creative.
Okay. So the book isn't entirely about values and feelings. There's also some technical information, particularly in your chapter of the book, Adam, where you start off by talking about where innovation comes from the new kid or the industry. Can you tell us a bit about that and why more innovation doesn't come from the traditional experts in our sector?
Yeah, that's probably, I think, at least throughout my career, probably the most interesting thing that I've come across is I think there would be a belief that especially mature industries, things like news, things like finance and the public sector that have so much workforce, you would see more innovation driven from those who are the biggest market cap at the time, but that's very, very rarely what you see. General Motors doesn't come to the market with the first electric car. Blockbuster doesn't build the Netflix model. It's often the new kid. And the new kid is just so amazingly, just by populace, outweighed by everybody in this industry. Why does that always happen? And to me, it's really simple. It's actually a little bit of a victim of scaling and success. In an industry, you have a solution that worked for an objective, and it's worked so well that you become a larger organization. Once you're the size of an organization that would have an HR department, think about what that means. You have people who work there that they just execute on HR, right? Maybe it's somebody who's just in charge of recruiting, somebody who's just in charge of dress code policies. Like there is organizations that are that size, and the roles become so singularly focused on execution. Whose job is it exactly to innovate? Right? And the success part is this is what worked. This is what made us our fortune. This is what has made our organization grow to this size. It's a real big risk. It feels like throwing all the marbles on the table to even make a statement to your board of directors or to the media, hey, we're going to try something new. That's kind of petrifying, and it creates an environment where you're very much reliant on a new kid to sweep in and say, I'll be the one to try something new.
To follow up on that, Adam, Carrie, and Andrea, the new kid is one of the characters, Andrea and Carrie, that you introduced in the introduction as an innovation character that you should join up and take advantage of their resources and capital and energy. How can that benefit our civil society sector, and how can it be a challenge?
So I think that the benefit of it is exactly what Adam said. The new kid often brings a new way of looking at things. They often bring an innovative way of looking at things, and they also bring an outsider's way of looking at things. But sometimes, and I think that this is where the challenge comes, they actually are saying something that we've been saying forever, but because they're packaged as the new kid, people listen to them. And sometimes that can feel very demoralizing for a sector that has tried so hard. And I also think that it sometimes, makes you want to say, like, why are you listening to the new kid? Why aren't you listening to me? I've been trying to say this all along. Why are you, for example, only funding the new kid to do this work? We also are capable. And not only that, we also have this like historical expertise that can infuse the work of innovation. And so I think that that's the challenge. And I think that because of that, sometimes the new kid gets shut down, or the new kid gets called irresponsible, or especially in our sector, that because lives are always at stake, there's this tendency to call the new kid irresponsible, or rushing to, put out, a product that is not properly researched. And so I think that's sort of our experience of the new kid.
Okay. In Adam, particularly in your chapter, but in other places in the book, you walk us through how the innovation process and how it moves from insight to knowledge to action. What often goes wrong in that process, or there may be a trap in that process?
That's a great question. To me, and I think if I were to say an overlying thesis of the book, is the lack of effort that's put into those first two things, insights and research. Especially in the private sector, where I'm more familiar with strategy teams, innovation teams, they're starting from action. Anybody have an idea? What are our peers doing? And that's where like the funding chain, if you will, begins. That art of tapping into the greatest value you have, expertise of people who have been in a field for a very long time and are seeing what they're seeing, and making a process where you ask questions. And when the answer is this might not be working, it's everybody's natural defense mechanism to say that really quietly and only to a few people, so that we're not throwing people under a bus, we're not making somebody look bad and whatnot. But the more people that are engaged in the conversation, the more expertise that you include, the more that you're really going to allow innovation to happen. And the rest of it, I think, is really valuable. But I think I'll let Carrie and Andrea hit on that point.
I see that there's a question about how to be the old kid that scales and maintains while being the new kid at the same time. And I think that that's a really good question, because I think that it requires a commitment to innovation, and it requires a commitment at the same time to maintaining the integrity of the programs that you currently have that are working and are serving the communities that you are responsible to. And I think that it's a duality that one has to hold. And I think it's a hard duality to hold, because I think that for two reasons. One, I think that there's a tendency to say, if you're in being the old kid that scales, to say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that there's a tendency, if you're the new kid, to want to tinker with everything to just make it a little bit better. And so I think it's about holding that duality. And it's interesting, we said that in Carrie's job title, it says innovation, but it also says programs. And so when I think about Carrie's role, it is to actually do both of the things. The programs part of Carrie's role is the old kid, to maintain integrity around our programs, around the clinical aspects of our programs, to make sure that they're delivering what they said that they would deliver to the people that they said we would do it. And the innovation part is to look at everything with a bit of a stink eye and say, are we really doing what we said we were going to do? And is there a better way to do it?
It's funny, Andrea, that you bring that up, because that was exactly the thing that I was thinking about, which is that, at an organization our size, it works for that to be one person, but there's huge value in that. It sometimes leaves me thinking, what am I doing in this room? And I've actually started to, in meetings, say, am I here as the director of innovation, or am I here as the director of programs? Because it also helps my team and the people sitting in the room to have an idea of what is my role in that moment, and what hat am I wearing. And I think that is really valuable to have. And I think, it could be done by more than one person, but the ability to recognize that you need both. I would tinker with everything all the time. And for a while, I did tinker with everything all of the time. Before we decided, actually, let's have an innovation team. And again, I'm not saying this is the structure that everybody should use, but at Sagest, we decided let's actually take that tinkering and let's move it out of operating and let's put it into a team where their whole job is just to tinker. Because then it allows the operating team to operate and not feel like at any moment I might walk into a room and be like, guys, I had a great idea last night. What about? And then to feel like now I got to operate and I got to be innovative and come up with this new idea and test out these new things at the same time, right? For us at Sage, the ability to separate that out in terms of the team while leaving me as the person with both of those hats has allowed for me to go into one room and say, hey guys, I had a great idea. Let's test this theory. Let's do the due diligence. Let's do the research background. Let's do some evaluation. Let's pilot some things. And then once we have a better idea of what that is, then let's take it to the operating teams so that they can then make this part of their sort of standard practice and standard model.
Mhm. So following up on that, as you mentioned, Sages has an innovation team, your team, and also as a board committed to innovation, including budget for innovation. So two parts to that. How do you get to the stage of devoting resources to it when there's the challenges of just everyday supporting the frontline need and making that decision to fund an innovative process rather than just the programs we put out there that frontline help individuals?
So from a Sages perspective, the decision to invest, and we invest about 2 to 4% of our global budget at least as a baseline in innovation, is one, we started to do it because we recognized that we had an obligation to serve our clients in the best way possible, and that to do the same thing over and over again and get the same results meant that we weren't moving the needle on eradicating domestic and sexual violence and sexual exploitation. From often boards and funders need proof of the value of investing in innovation. There's research that's been done that talks about how organizations that invest between 2 and 6% of their global budget in innovation are organizations that generally have year-over-year financial growth. And so there's also a really, and probably I'm going to talk more about this, but there's like a return on the investment of innovation. And I also think that what some of the research that's coming out of the nonprofit sector over COVID is that organizations that invested in innovation prior to COVID fared better during COVID. And so I think that innovation also sort of shock proofs your organization.
In terms of some of the sort of structural things, and I actually want to come back to Mark's question for a second in terms of the succeeding and the scaling piece. So in terms of the structure, I think one of the things is that we have to decide what we want to be in and what we don't want to be in. And so some of our decision is that we don't want to scale to this sort of huge level because it becomes harder, or that in our scaling, we're going to do that in certain ways. We have some programs that we look at that if I scaled it differently than how we currently hold it, maybe we could have a bigger footprint, but I would lose the ability to have innovation. And so we make some of those choices on an ongoing basis that might be choices that externally on a really baseline level could account to me saying I'm willingly keeping it small. And in some ways I am, but I'm willingly keeping it at a place where I think we have that ability to continue to hold both of those hats. And that as the need grows or as our capacity grows, then we have to figure out how to do that at a level and a perspective that allows for that to happen at the same time. And I think, internally, I spoke about it a little bit, this sort of separating out of having a team, having people that do innovation that are dedicated to that. I think for our programmatic work and our research work has been really, really foundational and has really just allowed them to have a different model and a different perspective. And I actually speak with them frequently. And we just had a meeting last week about this, that when they look at what their outcomes are or their outputs, and they look at that in comparison to other teams within the organization, they're totally different. And so how do we actually measure our success as a team along a different model and a different line than the people doing programmatic delivery? because what we want is actually more innovative thinking, more curiosity, more being in the messiness, and less outputs and less outcomes. And so that's a really hard thing to be able to do. And I think if I had to do that and talk about that with a team of 35 people, it would be really, really different than me talking about it with my sort of microcosm of 5 and building up their skills and capacity to be able to be okay with that. That doesn't have to be the model, but for right now, it's the model that works really well.
Okay. In the book, and particularly Adam, in your chapter, we talk a lot about how you measure the success of your innovation, or if you're even being innovative at all, or if you just think you are. Maybe we'll start with you, Adam. Like, what are some of the challenges that businesses and organizations in the civil society sector find in just measuring and seeing the impact of their innovation work?
And that's a terrific question. And I think that measurement starts with the objective in itself and how you determine that, what is it that I'm trying to do here, which is something I think Suggest is just terrific at compared to most organizations. And I think we allude to that quite a bit in the book. But the forming a really strong objective of what it is that you're hoping to have an outcome onto society, and then how you measure that you're having that outcome on society, not environmental changes or whatnot. That can be really hard, really challenging, sometimes subjective, and sometimes really complicated. And probably step one, and you just killed yourself from being able to be innovative, is when you say the sentence, too difficult to digest. Let's just picture the way we'll measure it, something really simple, right? The number of organizations that have a KPI called sales, right? Let's just easy to understand. We're gonna stick it at that. Really almost prevents you from being able to measure at all the impact that you're having, right? Then once you have the thesis of this is how I improve on that, if you can't measure that objective, you're really going to struggle to measure that your new innovation is moving the needle on that objective as well. So it's quite the challenge, but putting in the effort and being willing to get complicated and remembering that even when things are difficult and almost impossible, the key is to get to what you believe. There's a misconception that knowledge is facts. Boring knowledge is facts. Knowledge is what you believe based on the best information you can have.
There's the quote. Somebody write it down. That's awesome. Boring knowledge is facts. I'm going to use it for all time from now on.
I'll have it embroidered on a pillow for you, Carrie.
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. I think just to sort of add to that in terms of the evaluation piece, and my sort of intrepid evaluation guru is on the call. And I think I've learned so much from an evaluation perspective of getting to work with people who look at evaluation, I think in that same way that Adam is talking about, right? What do we actually care about? Why are we actually here? What is the point of what we actually want? And I think that part of what's been so interesting for me, because I sit here and I have innovation in my title and I wrote a book and I think I talk about it all the time, and I can't even tell you the number of times in sitting in conversations through an evaluation process that started as a let's just do a quick review and became a let's rewrite everything at Suggest, the number of times that I went, oh, I don't evaluate that because I care about it. I evaluate it because I think a funder cares about it. And it doesn't benefit me, and it doesn't benefit the community, and it doesn't give me any information that is helpful. It is boring knowledge. And who cares about any of that? And so I think that, in that evaluation perspective, being able to go way back down to the very, very beginning. What do you care about and why? And what are you going to do with it? And I would say that, since writing the book, Suggest has done a complete revamp of our evaluation. And we had a big, massive evaluation framework prior to. Yeah. So it wasn't that we weren't doing it. It wasn't that we didn't care. But something about stepping fully into the innovative mindset allowed us to say, we do care, but why do we care? And what are we going to do with that information once we have it? And if we're asking questions that we think a funder wants to know, but we actually don't care about otherwise, Why are we asking those questions? Why aren't we going back to the funder and saying, I'm sorry, but that we're not gathering that information for you? Or you've asked us for X and we're going to give you Y because we think it's a better story and it better speaks to the thing that you actually need to know. And so we're going to help to create that space to be able to educate you. And so I think, you know, when thinking about evaluation, and this is where the innovation comes as a mindset and a lifestyle. This isn't a, I have an evaluation framework, now I put it on the shelf and I don't ever have to think about it anymore, right? It becomes a, we look at it constantly and go, does this still tell us the thing we think we want to know? Do we still know what we think we want to know? Or are we just asking questions for the sake of questions? And then what?
Asking questions for the sake of asking questions. And I know one of the, well, a couple of the chapters of the book deal with research in development or touch on it and thought experiments. And I know that's much in your area of expertise, Carrie, and a passion for that. What are the big challenges when it comes to our sector and R&D?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is that R&D is seen as potentially dangerous to people's mental health and lives, like people who are serving. How can we play around with an outcome that we're not sure of what we're going to get when you're dealing with a human being's well-being? And I think as a result, what we've come to the conclusion is that R&D is irresponsible and dangerous. Which I think is kind of interesting, because if you think about where R&D lives the most societally, is it lives in the medical field. And, you know, we're definitely dealing with people's well-being, but the medical field is dealing with people's lives. And if there wasn't as much R&D as there was in the medical field, we wouldn't have, you know, insulin and the COVID vaccine or any of those things. But for some reason, we can't embrace the risk and understand that the risk actually leads to real solutions in the way that the medical field has, even though they're dealing with the same high stakes as we are.
I think the other thing that I think about is that it is specifically in Canada, it is a business to be, it is a business, it is a profession to be a researcher. You have outcomes that are not about the content or the idea or the community. They're about the university and the number of times that people's names get published in certain places. And all of that makes the process of doing interesting, innovative research that pushes the line really, really challenging. It's hard to fund, and it's hard to find people who align with you in that sort of idea. We talk about one of our colleagues in the book who we just finished. We just had a paper published about cortisol levels in clients' hair that we did through hair samples. A research project that when we met with her, I said, I want to do research about peer support. And she said, okay, well, we could do, you know, we could do some focus groups and we could do some interviews. And I said, we could, but it sounds kind of boring. And she said, I agree. I think it sounds boring also. And then she said, I had this idea. What about this? And I went, ooh, that's amazing. Right. And that project led to this 7 years later, this ability to publish something. And that same researcher the other day, I said, I have this, I want to research our informal supports program. And she said, well, okay, we can do it this way. And I said, but what about, and the same kind of thing, but finding people like that, finding people that you can do that work, finding people who have the funding and the capacity to do that work and the availability to do that work is hard. And as community members, as community practitioners, I don't have easy access to that. There is funding that I cannot get to be able to do that kind of research. And so I'm dependent on having somebody within an academic institution who's willing to do it and willing to do it in an innovative and interesting way. And I would say specifically in Canada, that's much harder than I think that it needs to be, or that I think that it allows for actual innovative research.
So I am sure along the journey, we talked about scaling our innovation efforts at Sagesse, but way back when you were not that long ago, when Sagesse was just a few people, including you, Carrie and Andrea, what can innovation look like, or what can you do if you don't have the funds to devote to it that you'd like to, or you don't have those academic partnerships? Is there any lessons you've learned along the way, or learnings that you've gained about what innovation can look like even in the smallest organizations?
So I almost feel like honestly, it's a tolerance thing. Carrie really like jumped on the old knowledge isn't fact. Knowledge is what you know based on, and the fact that it's boring information, right? Both Carrie and I can't stand, we have very little tolerance for boring. And I think that because we have very little tolerance for boring, it's like you can't be any other way than the way that you are. Carrie often tells the story of like her first day. So Carrie started as a practicum student at SAGES, but then moved into a position and then moved into a coordinator position when a mat leave came up. And the day that the coordinator left, on her mat leave, Carrie's very first day as the coordinator, Carrie came into my office and said, "I'm going to change everything." And I said,
No. I asked for permission. I said, can I change this core thing that is the foundation of everything we do? And Andrea said, you can fill in your line if you want. Andrea said, do whatever you want. At least in my mind, now 13 years later, that's what I heard was do whatever you want. Because I have just taken that as blanket permission for all time to do whatever I want. She said yes, so I can do whatever I want.
But I think that both of us had tolerance for it because both of us recognized, I don't want to say that we were bored with SAGES, but I want to say that we were, that what was happening was boring in a way that we weren't seeing, I would say, significant movement in the lives of our clients and in the way that our sector was able to perform. And I think that, it's, and I'm not a big like into like, these books and these, catchphrases, but this idea of good to great. And so I think that neither of us are satisfied with good enough. And I think that good enough feels boring to us. And so I think that all of that combination of all of those things.
I still think that there's something about Andrea and I both have a really clear perspective around the value of the work that we do and the why we do that work. And that if our goal as an organization or as humans is to build a big, massive organization that delivers programs all over the place, doing all of these kinds of things, then part of what we're actually hoping for is for people to continue to be experiencing domestic abuse and for people to continue to be being harmed. And so part of the value for me of looking at, I can remember another time walking into Andrea's office and saying, we serve people who are in the sector like really, really well. But what about, we know that most people don't talk to us and they don't talk to police. So what about everybody else? And this was so long ago, we didn't even have a lens for what that was, right? Which started us down a path. I see, our amazing colleague, Allison, who is the expert on informal supports research coming out of the UK, that started on us a path where we found something that Allison read and I went, oh, there's like this whole lens for informal supports work. And there's this whole perspective and this whole, and now when I think about SAGES, Real Talk is our second flagship program that we run as an informal supports program. But that program came out of this idea of, okay, so it's interesting enough what we do for people already, but it's a little boring. What are we missing? What's the next thing that we have a total gap to right now that if we turned our eye to and filled that gap, that could make a difference for that idea of, Catherine introduced me as wanting to be a race car driver, but that idea that I'd like to not have to do this work for my whole life feels really important to me in terms of that perspective of always looking for the new opportunity within innovation. And I think you don't have to have money to be able to do that. You have to have tolerance for the messy of that. You have to have tolerance for the slowness of that sometimes, and then the speed of that. And you have to have a space. I have a space with Andrea where if I ever said to her, I think I'm going to just take the day today and like read a book, she would say, I don't know why you're bothering to tell me that. That's fine. I don't care. Right? You have to have the space for that. You have the space for Andrea to trust in me and my process, that I'm going to do that. And for the board to trust in Andrea and her process, that when her and I say, we want to go to the UK for a month and travel around and meet a bunch of people, that actually there's all of this value that's going to come out of that and all of these longstanding relationships that we're going to be able to bring back and add back into Alberta.
I think, you know, for me, you know, we keep going back to values and we keep going back to like, you know, your emotional capacity to engage in it. But I don't think it matters if you're a big organization or if you're a small organization. I think if that's your framework, it's your framework. And, you know, I often talk about this, and it's funny because Carrie does roll her eyes when I say it because I've said it so often. But I actually think that it's a framework of a humble, reflexive inquiry, right? What Carrie just described of, you know, the humility to understand that we're not the answer, that actually informal supports are probably more the answer than we are, to be reflexive, to ask, how is it that if that is the case, our sector is still all built around us, right? And then the inquiry of like, well, then how do we move ourselves from the place that we are, right? And so I think that those things all are the framework. And I don't think it matters if you're a big or a small organization. And I think that the other part, you know, as we're talking about it, which is actually something that Adam and I have talked about, is that I think leadership isn't about necessarily having to like have all the answers or to tell the people how to, you know, enact the answers or operationalize the answers. It's recognizing when you have really talented people around you and just letting them run with their talent. And I think, you know, we're very lucky to have Carrie, who has had that perspective since the day that she walked into the agency. And I think that, you know, Catherine, you're another person that we have on our team that has a perspective like that. And so I think that the more that, you know, we allow that talent to like move fast in their own spheres of expertise, the more likely to have like this like synergistic experience of a humble, reflexive inquiry that then leads us hopefully to a better place than where we started.
And there's something also about this sort of humbleness piece, which I think is valuable, that I can say to Andrea, I think we should talk to an economist because I don't understand any of that. I don't know any of that. And that Andrea doesn't expect that I would know that, that's not the thing that I'm supposed to be the expert in. And because both her and I, and there's times where we say, well, do we need to bring in somebody else, or do the two of us share that knowledge enough? Or between our team, between, you know, our directors, our leaders, our coordinators, our associates, everybody on our team has this knowledge that they add. Do we hold that within the organization? And being more than willing to go, well, what if we talk to somebody outside of that, that maybe has that knowledge or has that expertise that we don't, and can look at it from a different perspective? And I think that for me in my career, that has been so unbelievably beneficial, is to say, I don't know anything about this. So let me talk to somebody who does know this and who knows it really, really well, so that they can help to bring me along, and I can decide what to take of all of those things that they talk about, what seems applicable to us and what doesn't.
Before I jump into a couple questions in the chat there, one final one for me. You mentioned letting people run with it, and there's a bunch of just, you know, letting Carrie run with it too. In the closing chapter of the book, you mentioned that's a bit of the secret sauce. It's not all of us or programs. The real secret sauce in innovation might be trust. Why is that your closing message? Only the tough questions here.
Yeah. So I think in some ways, I think that I know that this is like I'm stealing someone else's quote, but innovation moves at the speed of trust. And I think that, you know, we need mentors in it, and we need partners in crime in it. And we need to have trust in both of those things. And then I also think that we need to have people around us that we trust to engage in innovation in ways that challenge us outside of our comfort zone. You know, I think about some of the people actually that are attendees today. They are people who have challenged us as Sage Us to move outside of our comfort zone. But because we had high levels of trust with those people, we were really able to be open to listening to those messages and then to begin to make movement. And I think that that for me is the important part of the trust. And I think that the trust for me comes from the knowledge that both of people's expertise, right? So their credibility, but also that we're all pulling in the same direction. We all know our why, and we're all on board with our why, and we're all aligned with our why.
Yeah, and I think, if I think about it with my team, as I mentioned, I have this powerhouse 5-person team that does, the sort of bulk of the program development and research and evaluation work within SAGES. And trust for me with them has to be, they have to trust me when I come back and say, hey guys, I had an idea. And what if we did this thing and it seems like it's totally off the wall and it has no connection point? They have to trust to be in that process with me. And I have to trust them to say, you've gone too far, or you're not going far enough, or if we try to do it this way, we're going to cause harm. And, we often sort of joke about, there's this graphic that I think came from Simon Sinek about, and talks about chaos and process, and that innovation without chaos is just chaos, and process without a little bit of chaos is just process, right? But when you put those two together, when you take me and my chaos, and I call myself chaos all the time with the team, and I walk into meetings and I create chaos watching, old videos because somebody said something and I decide to pull it up, and that's my MO, that's what I do. But my team is there to help build that process piece. And without both of those things, we wouldn't be able to be successful in that. And so I have to trust them that when I say, I'm going to do this thing, and they put process around it, that's beneficial. And they have to trust my chaos, and they have to trust that I'm going to be open to them putting process around it. Otherwise, we just become this sort of chaotic, we think we're innovative, but we just sit in this place where we spin our wheels and we talk about things over and over and over again.
I'm going to put together 2 questions from the audience. So for the book, what was your biggest challenge in developing the book? And then now, what are you most proud of with the book?
Well, the whole thing about innovation is it's iterative and it keeps changing, which meant that every time we had an iteration of what we thought the book was done, we're like, actually, it's not. We've just learned this new thing, and now we want to share this new thing in this book. And so there's almost this part of me that feels like it shouldn't be a book about innovation, because we're constantly iterating our understanding of this process and our understanding of what it is that you need. And as soon as it's a book, it's written and now it's out there. And so I think that for me, that was the very most challenging part. I feel like it's not a done work, but it got, put in a book and now it's got pages, and it is.
So that sounds like basically a promise that whoever buys the book gets the 2nd and 3rd edition as we learn things for free. Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
I think that for me, it feels, we talk about this a lot, and we talk about innovation a lot. We talk about what that means. And I think that, as a young, scrappy organization, I mean, I say young, but we're a 40-year-old organization, but I think as an organization that was small, grassroots, kind of scrappy, kind of flew under the radar for a really, really long time, it has always sort of felt like we're kind of just like, I used to say that Andrea and I are the crazy ladies in the back of the room that you want to kick out, but you can't. But we're in the back of the room. And so it's okay, because we're in the back of the room. We're kind of quiet, except cackling to ourselves. What I'm proud of, but also what is the most challenging, is that I think that this puts us not at the back of the room. I think that we've said to ourselves and said to our clients and to our colleagues that we want to see it at the front of the table, and we're still going to be us. I was talking about this book recently, and somebody asked some question. I said, well, no, it's still like written by us. There's dialogue in it. There's ridiculous jokes. We make up chapter numbers as we go. Like, we're still authentically those crazy ladies. But we're now sitting at the front of the table, which is both really cool and something to be really proud of, and at the same time, super, super hard. super hard to be in and to do.
So maybe the last question, as you mentioned, it's definitely a different type of innovation book. Just thought you call it a choose your own adventure book and encourage people to skip around with chapters is a bit different. And also your overwhelming use of hashtags is a little different as well. Definitely not a formal academic piece, except for Adam's chapter. It could fit in there.
Adam is for sure the grown up in the book.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Adam gave us our
definitely.
cred.
So with this rather informal book, what do you hope people get out of it when they pick it up?
I want us to begin as a society, be able to really move the needle on irretractable issues that the civil society sector is addressing. Things that we haven't been able to move the needle on, I think, as much as we should be able, that we should, like domestic abuse, sexual exploitation, poverty, homelessness. You know, I could give you the long list. And my hope is, and those are overwhelming, really, really heavy things to be dealing with. And they can be very depressing and hard. And my hope is that this book inspires and encourages the civil society sector to engage in innovation, but also to feel buoyed up by the innovation, to feel inspired by the innovation, for it to give them a sense of a lightness of being that I think that we don't get a lot in what we do. And I think that that is particularly why we wrote the book the way that we did. I also think in many ways, innovation is the antidote to the heaviness in our sector. And I think in many ways, it's the antidote to the burnout that we have, because innovation actually really does make you feel like you're moving forward in ways that I think a lot of things don't. So that's how I'm hoping that the book gets used. That's how I'm hoping that people engage with the book. And I hope it makes people both, you know, we have to have a sense of humor in the work that we do, and we have to be able to laugh. And I hope that what this book does is encourage all of that. And the other thing is, I think that sometimes in our sector, we feel a lot of shame that we're not doing enough, that we're not doing it properly, that we haven't solved these things. And I hope what this does is destigmatize the shame and allow people just to like show up in the messiness of it, knowing that we're all in it together and we all want to make society a better place.
I think for me, the thing that I would add to that I hope the book does, is that innovation can be a lonely road, and it can be a hard road, and there can be times where it feels like I'm pushing uphill and nobody's really interested in that. And in fact, people are beyond not interested, they're mad that I'm trying to do that. And I've had those feelings myself. And, you know, my success in being able to do this comes because I have a strong internal team. But I have also created a really strong external team. And there's a bunch of people on this call, and there was a bunch of people at our in-person launch, and the people that we talk about in the book who I consider sort of my innovation community. And having that innovation community has made it easier. There are days where I think, oh my God, what are we doing? And why are we doing this? And to know that I can have a conversation with a colleague in a different place who has done something similar and had a similar feeling helps to sort of lift some of that burden. And so if by putting this out, we can do that for other people, and we can create opportunities for people to feel like I'm feeling these same things, or I'm asking these same things, or I feel like the new kid. I had somebody actually recently who was at our in-person launch email me afterwards and said, I think I'm the new kid. And it was so interesting to hear them identify with that and then go, I think I'm the new kid. And I think that part of what I need is community. And what could that community look like? And can we do that together? And for me, that feels so interesting and so valuable to be able to create space for people to be able to step into that and not necessarily feel like they're all on their own.
That's great. I hope all of you here attending and heard that invitation from Carrie and Andrea and Adam that to join and continue supporting each other in community towards innovation and solving those intractable social issues. So with that, thank you very much for attending today, and I hope you have a chance to pick up the book and join us in this journey along the way. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.